The opposing campaign reaction now, or I guess previews, maybe a better term. Erin Perrine joins us. Erin is the director of press communications, Trump 2020. It's good to see you again, Erin. It's interesting that we've seen these types of announcements, the way they play out in campaigns. The campaign making the announcement gets all excited. They try to raise money. Looks like Biden-Harris is doing that over the last 24 hours. The opposing campaign goes after the nominee. You guys are doing that. She's a phony. She's a radical. I saw a new liberal handler in the ad that was put out. So we kind of get all that. So let me try to ask the question this way as we start off. You know who you're running against right now. You know who the president and Vice President Pence will be up against. What do you want this campaign to be about? What's a single issue you want this campaign or choice to be about now?
Well, it's a clear choice between American exceptionalism and government bureaucracy, socialist policies of the left. President Trump and Vice President Pence have delivered American exceptionalism through opportunity, through tax cuts, through a booming economy we saw before the coronavirus, through the handling of the pandemic. You contrast that with what you've seen, the choice with Joe Biden, who is an empty vessel of the left and will be happy to go along with what Kamala Harris asks him to do. You see his policies would devastate America. Repealing those Trump tax cuts, that's not the way to bring America through the coronavirus. As we've seen, President Trump has stood firm, led efficiently, and we have seen millions of jobs come back on board as we begin to reopen safely in this country. That's a real contrast. That's a real choice, and it's one that the American people need to make. It's one where they will choose American greatness or socialist principles of the Biden-Harris campaign.
Because the way I read it, and I think what you're saying somewhat backs this up, is that the Biden folks see this, or I guess we should say Biden-Harris now, as if they can make it about President Trump. What do you think of President Trump? A referendum. They think they win, and they're ahead in the polls for what it's worth. You guys think it's a choice between the two, like it was last time, Trump or Hillary. If it's Trump or Biden, that's better for you.
If we're talking about the choice between President Trump or Joe Biden, the American people will see the difference. It's stark. It's clear. You see President Trump's leadership. You've seen what a Trump economy looks like, and you've seen what economic recovery looks like under Joe Biden. It is stagnant wages. It is high unemployment. It is an economy that is anemic. You see what President Trump has done. Listen, the president spent his career signing the front of paychecks, creating jobs, building businesses in this country. Joe Biden is an almost 50-year D.C. swamp creature who now has someone on his ticket who fully believes in hiking taxes on the American people with the Green New Deal. Listen, I'm in Pennsylvania right now, and you want to talk about what the Green New Deal would do for jobs here? It would decimate the economy. This is a choice. It is a choice between American leadership and failed policies, tax hikes, and economic devastation. The choice is clear for the American people.
I want to ask you about some of those states. I'm actually going to Pennsylvania next week to get into some of the swing states myself, which I'm looking forward to. I will. While you were speaking, Erin, we flashed up some of the numbers. Those were the average of the polls, Real Clear Politics, in some of these swing states. President Trump earlier today, in one of his tweets, said that he is leading in most of the swing states. The numbers on the screen that we showed, we'll get to this other tweet that's up there in a moment, so we'll take that down for a second. But on the swing state issue, the numbers show the opposite, that Biden is leading in most of the swing states. So what states is the president referring to? Do you know?
The president is talking about our internal polling here on the campaign. And listen, we can get into the issues that exist with polling, with public polling, with sampling, with demographics, with the breakdown that these polls use, because they're flawed. And they still haven't figured out how to poll the hidden Trump voter that this campaign knows exists. There's polling that shows actually over 60% of Americans won't share their political views because they're afraid. And that's easy to see why. So we know we're in a good spot. President Trump is on the rise. We know we are in a very good spot. And whether it's the fact that his Rasmussen daily poll has him, his daily average approval, above where President Obama was at this point in 2012, or the fact that you saw some other polling come out today that had the likelihood of Joe Biden winning at the same level that it had Hillary Clinton in 2016. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now.
Now, I did want to ask you, because I mentioned earlier how the idea from the Biden campaign is going to be to go after the president personally, call him all kinds of things, even call him racist at times. And that tweet that flashed up on the screen earlier, the reason I wanted to ask you about that, because doesn't the president play into the hands of those criticisms when he tweets things like the, quote, suburban housewife will be voting for me, as he did earlier today? In that tweet, he says he ended this long-running program where low-income housing would, quote, invade their neighborhoods, meaning the, I guess, suburban housewife, and immediately was attacked as racist by some of his critics. What are you saying?
President Trump is not a racist, and what he is pointing to clearly in that tweet was a federal overreach into local zoning ordinances that wanted to be done. Listen, this is a president that is about opportunity for all Americans. His record is clear on that. You want to talk about racism? You want to talk about stoking division? Look at Joe Biden. He thinks that black Americans are a monolithic group that need to vote for him because if you're not voting for him, you ain't black. He doesn't question whether or not his policies have devastated the 94 crime bill. Heck, even Kamala Harris's running mate said that led to mass incarceration in the United States. Compare that to President Trump, who put forward criminal justice reform, and 90% of those released were black Americans. The contrast is clear. Listen, I get it. The media and Joe Biden want to try to paint President Trump for something he isn't. It's our job here on the campaign to put the facts out there. The facts are on President Trump's side. He's done more for black Americans. You've seen record low unemployment. Heck, if you look at the employment numbers last month that came out, we saw almost a full percentage drop in black unemployment just last month. That's a direct reflection of President Trump's policies. It's a direct reflection of an America First agenda. Joe Biden wants to try and separate and divide this country because as a Democrat, you see time and again, they think if America fails, they win. President Trump sees this as an entire nation. He doesn't care.
Wrap it up, Erin. Thank you. We appreciate you coming on.